defeating the ultimate villain. And the heroes in this instance are actually all y'all, builders. And the villain in this case is actually the ultimate villain, the villain of all things: fear, decay, and death itself. In this story, our heroes succeed against the villain by using an ancient tool called startup societies. It's a very old story, constantly repeating a cycle of centralization and subsequent decentralization. We would like you to be a character in that story, and hopefully help us finish it. But before we get into all that, I think it's probably worthwhile to explain what we mean by a startup society. I'm going to be honest, it sounds like kind of a buzzy word, one that you'd probably hear at entrepreneurship boot camp. And like all good buzzy words, this one's made up too. But the goal of that word is to encapsulate a series of very real trends and movements that converge into one river: the urge to create small experimental communities. And that's it. That's the definition. A startup society is simply a new experimental community. We use the word startup because it implies that the community is new and attempting new things that might be successful and then scale and help the people that they service. We use the word society because it is a term broad enough to be small-scale projects, all the way to projects that can scale to tens or even hundreds of millions of people. While the term is broad, it's useful because it points to a cycle where new communities need to continually form for the health of civilization. When an old order decays and the original formula for success is distorted or no longer works, new decentralized communities must be formed in order to bring new life. This cycle is true of civilizations, countries, cities, towns, companies, and even families. And as of today, there are a multitude of different startup societies. One that many of y'all might be very familiar with are of special economic zones. These are areas within host nations that have different policies that make them attractive for residents and businesses. Think taxes, regulations, administration, et cetera. Famous examples of this include Shenzhen, which was, prior to its designation as a special economic zone, a fishing village of about 30,000 people. And after the Great Cultural Revolution, the death of Mao, China realized that they desperately needed to make reform, but they absolutely could not do it on the national scale lest they cause a whole new revolution. But they needed to make those changes desperately. So what they instead did is that they designated multiple areas within China with different rules and policies. And as a consequence of Shenzhen being designated as a special economic zone, within 3 decades, it now has a population of 18 million and the same GDP as Vietnam, Ireland, and Argentina. Similarly, in Dubai, which designated about 40 special economic zones within a couple of decades, it became from a desert to now what is considered a global hub of trade. And today, there are some estimates that there are 5,400 special economic zones all around the world of varying depths of policy reforms. Movements like charter cities attempt to replicate these examples by implementing legal frameworks that will likewise build new cities. Others, like new cities or smart city projects, don't use any legal frameworks, but simply experiment with advanced infrastructure to build new cities. You also have smaller scale projects, including intentional communities, new towns, eco-villages, and communes that experiment in urban planning, sustainable infrastructure, and even experimental social dynamics. What people often don't think about this is digital communities also meet this definition of a startup society. They too are new experimental communities. Whether it's an online subculture, an active Reddit, or a layer 1 blockchain, these are startup societies. There's also mixtures of the physical, digital, and legal communities. For instance, a digital economic zone is a special economic zone that has territory and a legal framework, but is geared mostly to benefit those in the digital space. Also, more nascently is the idea of a network state, which, as is often defined, is an attempt to take a very aligned online community, negotiate with the host nation, and then to crowdfund a territory, often including some sort of special zone provision. Again, these seem like very disparate ideas, but they all share a common methodology, which is using new communities with new innovations in order to grow. And while these specific names are new, the methodology is as old as civilization itself. And it's this story of the cycle of new societies and the attempt to fight death itself, the decay of societies. One of the first examples of this actually began in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, which was arguably one of the first examples of experimentation with megalithic structures and organized religion. And then you had the Sumerian civilizations, which are arguably one of the first cities that experimented with the ideas of writing and specialization. They became so successful that they eventually became the first empires. But this is where the villain enters the story. These empires soon actually fell as well. The cycle of death and decay, which haunts us on an individual level, likewise destroys societies, turning thriving metropolises into ruin. Every time a startup society scales, it eventually sows the seeds of its own destruction, leading to decay and subsequently decentralization, which then provides an opportunity for our heroes to build new startup societies. The next time our heroes appear, they create city-states in the Mediterranean. Some famously, like Athens, experimented novel forms of governance, leading to enormous strides in technology, philosophy, and culture. These are also subjected to the cycles of entropy and death, but in the wake, new ones appear, arguably culminating in some of the most successful startup societies of all time, including Rome, which emerged from a simple city-state into one of the largest empires the world has ever known. And today, this empire is still felt today with its innovations in urban planning, infrastructure, code of law, and language. And in parallel to Rome, grew a startup society based on a Middle Eastern religion that initially spread like wildfire after small communities of believers attracted members to a new way of social organization, eventually subsuming the entire empire. But again, the cycle continued and Rome too declined, though some parts were kept alive and even rejuvenated through startup societies. This time, our heroes were in Florence and Venice. And then up north, they started the Hanseatic League, a confederation of independent city-states that governed so effectively that they fought tyrants, they fought pirates, and arguably led to the creation of the Industrial Revolution. And that revolution spread to the Americas, where it created numerous communities that eventually became states. And as a consequence of that good governance, they were able to attract immigrants from around the world, leading to the biggest increase in prosperity and lifespan the world has ever seen. It seemed that the cycle of death and decay was on its last legs. But it's back, and it will continue to be back. The cycle continues both individually and corporately, and death continues to reign. It is the contention, I believe, of this conference that now is the time to pick up the mantle again and fight against the cycle of decay, again with startup societies. With all this in mind, the obvious question is, why bother? It kind of seems like a Sisyphean struggle with only suffering. That's what a cycle is. Also, as you probably thought in that brief, reductionist view of history that I just gave, many of those examples of startup society have done absolutely horrible things, ranging from war, slavery, and genocide. Isn't it simply better to reform our institutions through standard channels? Well, for one, once a society achieves a sufficiently advanced stage of decay, making meaningful reforms through existing channels is no longer possible. Institutions are captured by special interests that are more concerned with maintaining their positions rather than preventing decline. Also, it doesn't seem that standard channels and governance deals with war, slavery, and genocide any better. In fact, arguably, they are infinitely worse. With the reported death toll from the 20th century alone from death by large states totaling more than 250 million souls. Regardless, even if there is even one injustice associated with a startup society, it would be too much. But if history is to hold true, like a flood, startup societies are coming whether we like it or not. But we can determine what ship we build, and more importantly, how it is built. In this cycle, we can learn from past mistakes and choose to build startup societies that are strictly through voluntary consent, with integrity, and for the benefit of all. But startup societies are not just a wall for when the levee breaks, a paranoid billionaire bunker. They are a garden to grow a better world. Startup societies have led to industrial revolutions, political reforms, expansion of lifespan, and living standards. Today, we can use them to build AI that eliminates scarcity, generate energy to power our way to the stars, and yes, even defeat death itself. But without these gardens, in the throes of decaying bureaucracies, these innovations may be swallowed up, never to see the light of day again. So that's why we formed Startup Societies Network in around 2016, a nonprofit dedicated to connecting entrepreneurs, investors, academics, and policymakers as a catalyst to build more, better, and more ethical next-generation startup societies. Back in the 2010s, and many people here can attest to that, we were simply crazies with the blog. Since then, next-generation projects like the ZAs have flourished. In parallel, Startup Societies Network has created trade shows, peer-reviewed journals, and even a how-to guide to build private startup societies. Even the founders of Startup Societies Network have co-founded the first special economic zone in the United States with the Catawba Indian Nation. Because of the explosive growth of this space, we have a dearth of experts to help you build them. For the next few days, you're going to be hearing from the best in the field. Day one, which is today, you're going to be focusing on the principles to build startup societies. What makes them work? What makes them tick? How do you make them financially sustainable? In day two, you will be hearing from actual entrepreneurs and builders who are actually working on projects to share their experiences and help build best practices. The third day will conclude with the pitch competition with the goal to energize those participating to actually join the movement as builders. One thing I want to make clear, though, we don't want participants who are just going to lay the groundwork for the next cycle of decay. Like many empires, some startup societies have been despotic, corrupt, incompetent, and parasitic. These startup societies are often closed systems with limited right to exit or opt in. Even if they do have such rights, negotiations with these startup societies are often lopsided against underprivileged communities and often rely on extractive business models. They often don't even have the common decency to simply engage with the community and speak with them on a human level. Ideally, a startup society should be instigated from the affected communities. This is a lot easier with a strictly digital community. For physical ones, a startup society builder may not be local, and if that's the case, they must take extreme care to engage the community, ensuring transparent controls, and yes, making sure that they're justly compensated. And this isn't charity. It's not patronizing virtue signaling. When you partner with a community, they are investing their land, their reputation, their sovereignty. They're investors. And with any startup, you have to make sure that you're ensuring that you're maximizing shareholder value. And this is the greatest sign of respect. It's a fair trade. And like good investors, these community leaders, they're often great bullshit detectors. So if you come there with a lack of authenticity, they'll be able to tell immediately. So who do we want as a startup society founder? They should be someone who's obsessed with delight, with human flourishing. They should absolutely despise death, fear, and decay. More importantly, they have to viscerally see that world of light, where humans are flourishing. And they have to be so motivated by the difference between that vision and what the world is that they're willing to go to any lengths to bring it into a reality. This is a curse. It's a curse to bless the world. And if they do not have this component, they'll just quit. There's nothing harder. If you do this route, and I hope you do, but I'm asking you all if you want to do it. But just letting you know, if you do this, this will be the hardest thing you will ever do. You will be chewing glass while looking into an abyss, surrounded by sharks that are all gossiping about you. And that's on a good day. But we can do it. Yes, it's a call to arms, but not with bullets, not with bombs, but a war against decay with the weapons of intelligence, creativity, sweat, blood, and tears. And that sounds impossible, but it's already been done before. This room is filled with the seeds of a new Haynesiatic league, a network of startup societies working together to build the next industrial revolution. I am looking at a garden of redwood trees growing a world of technological abundance. And if we get this right, and if we do it with good hearts, sound minds, and a will that can crack iron, we can even end the cycle of death and live together in a nightless day amongst the stars. We can write that story together, and we can build it with startup societies. Everyone, welcome to the Startup Society Summit.